A warrior out of place. In the cold reaches of space, where stars flickered like distant embers in the blackness, Darius Kane maneuvered his small, armored ship through asteroid fields and nebulas. To most, the expanse was terrifying, an endless void that could swallow you whole. But to Darius, this was home. Known as one of the galaxy's most relentless bounty hunters, he had carved out a reputation as a man who could track and capture anything or anyone. This mission was supposed to be simple: a high-value target, an infamous arms dealer by the name of Harkos Vane, had evaded the Galactic Federation for years, but Darius had narrowed down his location to a remote star system on the galaxy's edge. Once he cornered Vane, the mission would be complete. Darius prepared for a routine capture as his ship glided silently through space, closing in on its destination. Just as he began descending towards the target planet, alarms blared across the control panel. Bright red lights flashed, casting an eerie glow on Darius's face as his ship jolted violently. Darius quickly engaged the autopilot override, his fingers dancing over the control panel, but the ship's systems were no longer responding to him. It was as if an invisible force had seized control. "What the?" Darius muttered, his voice a mix of surprise and irritation. His vessel was wrenched out of its course, veering sharply off into an unfamiliar direction. The gravitational pull was overpowering, yanking his ship with a force he'd never experienced before. The dense clouds parted, and suddenly he was plummeting through the atmosphere of an unknown planet, heading straight for the surface. He braced himself as his ship spiraled, colliding with the ground in a blinding flash of metal and dust. When Darius opened his eyes, his head pounded, his vision blurred. The ship was a wreck. He groaned, struggling to move as he unlatched himself from the cockpit and stumbled out. Taking in his surroundings, he felt an overwhelming sense of strangeness. This was no ordinary place. The ground shimmered with an iridescent glow, casting hues of violet and green that seemed to move beneath his feet. The air was thick, filled with a sweet, intoxicating scent that made him lightheaded. "Where am I?" he muttered, trying to steady himself. Before he could fully process his predicament, a soft, melodic voice drifted towards him. "You are in the palace of Princess Aurora of the Lithari Empire." Darius spun around, his instincts kicking in as he reached for his blaster, only to find it missing from his holster. Standing before him was a woman of striking beauty. She was tall, graceful, her skin a deep violet that shimmered in the dim light. Her eyes, large and radiant, held a mysterious gleam, studying him with an intense curiosity. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough but guarded. "I am Vala, royal attendant to Princess Aurora," she said with a slight bow. "You were brought here by the princess herself." Darius scowled, his mind racing as he tried to piece together this bizarre turn of events. Why would she bring me here? Vala tilted her head, a faint smile crossing her lips. The princess sought a pet from the outer worlds, something rare, intriguing. But it seems she has found something more formidable. Darius' eyes narrowed, his pride bristling. "I'm no one's pet." Vala's smile grew, her gaze unshaken. "Yes, I see that now. You are different from the others we have encountered. Most humans are compliant, docile. You, however, have a fire within you. The princess will find that interesting." Darius clenched his fists, resisting the urge to retaliate. The situation was dire, but he knew better than to rush into action without understanding his surroundings. He was a hunter, a man of strategy. He'd play along for now. Before he could say another word, the door at the far end of the chamber slid open, revealing a tall, regal figure. She was unlike any being he'd ever seen, with an ethereal beauty that was both mesmerizing and unnerving. Her skin was a shade darker than Vala's, a rich, royal violet, and her eyes were a deep, almost hypnotic blue that glowed with an inner light. Her hair flowed like midnight waves, cascading down her back in a manner that seemed to defy gravity. She moved with an elegance that conveyed both power and authority. "I am Princess Aurora," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "And you, human, are now under my protection." Darius felt every instinct screaming at him to stay on guard. This woman, this alien princess, radiated power, a presence that could only belong to someone used to absolute control. But Darius was no stranger to intimidation. He squared his shoulders, meeting her gaze with a defiance that he knew would either interest or anger her. "Protection?" he echoed, his voice laced with suspicion. "From what?" "From the dangers of my world and from those who would seek to harm you." Aurora replied, stepping closer. "You are unique. Unlike any of the others, there is something in you that intrigues me, something I have never encountered." Darius held his ground, his mind calculating every possible outcome. "What exactly do you want from me?" She regarded him thoughtfully, a small smile playing on her lips. "For now, I desire your company. But make no mistake, human, you are in my domain. You would obey my commands." Darius felt a surge of defiance that swallowed it, knowing this was neither the time nor the place for rebellion. He forced a slight bow, hiding the smoldering determination in his eyes. "As you wish, Your Highness," he said, masking his tone with a false humility. Aurora's smile widened, a hint of satisfaction gleaming in her gaze. She gestured to Vala. "See to it that our guest is made comfortable. He will dine with me tonight." As Vala led Darius down a corridor lined with strange, shifting symbols and holographic images, he took in every detail, silently analyzing his surroundings. The palace was an architectural marvel, a blend of alien technology and artistry that spoke of an ancient, advanced civilization. The walls seemed alive, their surfaces shimmering and pulsing in response to their movements, as if the entire building was some sentient entity. Darius was led to a grand dining hall, a vast chamber filled with chandeliers that bathed the room in a warm, golden light. The walls were adorned with intricate murals depicting scenes of battles, love, and sorrow, all rendered in hues that changed subtly as he passed. But his focus wasn't on the artwork or the splendor. His attention was locked on the woman sitting at the head of the table, her gaze fixed firmly on him. Princess Aurora sat with regal poise, every inch of her exuding authority and grace. She gestured to a seat beside her, a silent command that brooked no defiance. Reluctantly, Darius took his place, his movements calculated, his eyes scanning the room, aware of every guard and servant watching him from the shadows. "You seem tense, Darius," Aurora observed, a slight teasing note in her voice. "There is no need to be. You are my guest, after all." Darius forced a tight smile. "Forgive me, Your Highness. It's not every day I dine with royalty." Aurora's lips curved, a glint of intrigue in her eyes. "You are not like the others we have brought here. They are fearful, eager to please. But you are a warrior, aren't you?" He held her gaze, refusing to yield. "Yes, and I'm not here to please anyone." "Good," she replied, her smile widening. "I find honesty refreshing." As the meal progressed, Aurora questioned him about his life, his missions, the galaxy beyond her empire. Darius answered cautiously, offering only fragments of his story, always keeping his guard up. But he couldn't deny the strange allure of the princess. There was something in her eyes, a sorrow, a deep loneliness that contradicted her imperious demeanor. "You have seen much of the galaxy, haven't you?" she asked, her voice softening. "More than I'd like to admit," he replied, sensing that beneath her fascination lay a different kind of longing, a desire for connection, perhaps even companionship. As the conversation wound down, Darius realized that he was facing a choice unlike any he'd encountered. He could try to escape, to return to his life as a hunter, or he could play along, biding his time, learning more about this enigmatic princess and the empire she ruled. Either way, he knew one thing for certain: he was no one's pet, and he wouldn't be caged. Shadows and secrets. The ornate halls of the Lithari Palace held their secrets well, with winding corridors and chambers filled with a silent, watchful energy that set Darius on edge. As he followed Vola through the maze-like passageways after the dinner, his thoughts drifted back to his earlier encounter with Princess Aurora. There was something about her that was both alluring and unsettling. Her beauty and authority masked something deeper, something he couldn't yet decipher. And, as much as he wanted to escape, he knew that understanding his captor might be his only way to freedom. As they arrived at his assigned quarters, Vala gestured to a door on his left. The room was spacious and luxurious, draped in silken fabrics and adorned with strange artifacts that seemed to shift and change under the ambient lighting. But to Darius, it felt like a gilded cage. "You will remain here until the princess summons you," Vala instructed, her tone devoid of warmth. "Should you require anything, simply touch the panel by the door." Darius took a few steps into the room, eyeing Vala with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "Why does the princess want me here? Surely there are more compliant guests she could choose from." Vala's expression softened, just slightly. "The princess values what is rare, what defies expectation. You may not understand now, but Aurora is not what she appears to be." Darius arched a brow. "And what exactly is she?" "She is bound by duty, yet she yearns for something more," Vala replied cryptically. "The Lithari Empire was built on loyalty and power, but also on isolation. The princess's curiosity about your world goes beyond mere amusement." "Curiosity?" Darius scoffed. "I didn't crash land here because she was curious." Vala's eyes narrowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, you didn't. But you're here now. And that makes you significant." Before he could press her further, Vala turned sharply and exited the room, leaving Darius alone with his thoughts and a lingering sense of unease. As much as he despised the idea of being kept against his will, he had to admit there was a part of him intrigued by the mysteries surrounding Aurora and her empire. Darius explored his quarters, noting the subtle elegance of the design and the way the walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if the room itself were alive. He found himself standing by a small window that overlooked the palace grounds, a sprawling landscape of shimmering gardens, fountains, and strange flora that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. He felt a strange pull, as if something in this alien world were calling to him. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed in the room, and the door slid open. Darius spun around, instinctively reaching for his blaster, only to remember it was still missing. In the doorway stood a tall figure, clad in dark robes and with a face obscured by a hood. "Darius Kane," the figure said, that a voice a low murmur. "I have come to offer you a choice." Darius's gaze sharpened, his instincts flaring. "Who are you?" The figure lowered their hood, revealing a Lithari male with sharp features and a serious expression. His skin was a lighter shade of violet, and his eyes held a calculating gleam. "I am Azar, part of the Lithari resistance. We oppose the rule of the imperial family, and we seek an alliance with you." Darius crossed his arms, intrigued. "An alliance? You think I'm here by choice?" Azar's gaze was steady. "No, but you are here, and that makes you valuable. The princess brought you here because she believes she can control you. But she underestimates you, as she underestimates many things beyond her empire's walls." Darius's mind raced. "What exactly do you want from me?" Azar took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We need someone who can gain her trust, who can get close enough to gather information that could change the course of the empire." Darius narrowed his eyes. "Why should I help you?" Azar's expression was somber. "Because in doing so, you might find a way back to your world. The Lithari Empire's power stretches far, but there are secrets within its walls that could aid your escape. And in exchange, you would be aiding us in freeing our people from the grip of the royal family." Darius considered the offer, his mind already calculating the risks and benefits. He wasn't a stranger to espionage, and he understood the stakes well. Working with the resistance could be his way out, but it also meant going deeper into the very heart of the empire. He was no stranger to high-stakes missions, but this was different. He was dealing with a power he didn't fully understand. "I'll consider it," he replied cautiously. "But make no mistake, I don't take orders from anyone. If I do this, it's on my terms." Azar nodded, a faint smile flickering across his lips. "Of course, the choice is yours. But know this, the princess is not as invulnerable as she seems. Beneath the elegance and command, there are fractures, weaknesses that few are privy to. You have a unique opportunity, Darius Kane. Don't squander it." With those words, Azar retreated into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly as he had appeared. Darius stood there, the weight of the encounter settling over him like a shroud. The palace, once merely a prison, now felt like a battlefield, with hidden players and shifting allegiances lurking in every corner. The following day, Darius was summoned to the royal chamber once more. This time, he was prepared. He had spent the night devising a plan, calculating every possible outcome of his encounter with the princess. As he walked down the gilded corridors, flanked by silent guards, he couldn't help but feel the tension thrumming through the palace. The air was thick with an energy he couldn't quite place, as if the very walls were aware of the secrets that lay within them. He was led into a grand hall where Princess Aurora awaited him. Draped in an elegant robe that shifted colors with her every movement, she looked every bit the sovereign ruler, her gaze steady and unreadable. "Darius," she greeted him, her voice smooth and calm. "I trust you rested well." Darius nodded, his expression guarded, as well as one can in unfamiliar surroundings. Aurora's lips curved in a faint smile. "I imagine a warrior like you would feel uneasy in a palace. Tell me, have you found anything here that intrigues you?" Darius met her gaze, carefully choosing his words. "The Empire is different from what I've seen in the galaxy. Your people, your technology, there's much I don't understand." Aurora tilted her head, as if studying him. "And would you care to learn?" Darius hesitated, sensing the test behind her question. "Perhaps. There's always something to be gained from understanding new worlds." Aurora stepped closer, her gaze sharp and discerning. "You're an enigma, Darius Kane, a man who has seen countless stars, yet holds his secrets as tightly as his weapons. Tell me, do you find this empire worthy of your trust?" Darius held her gaze, his voice steady. "Trust is earned, Your Highness. It isn't given lightly." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps admiration, crossed her face. "Then perhaps in time, we may earn it." As their conversation continued, Darius felt the weight of his decision pressing upon him. He was caught between two forces, the authority of a princess who sought to control him, and the resistance that sought to use him for their own ends. Yet he knew that beneath Aurora's regal facade lay complexity he hadn't anticipated, a blend of curiosity, loneliness, and perhaps even vulnerability. And as much as he wished to escape, he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards unraveling the enigma that was Princess Aurora. He was a man accustomed to control, to certainty. Yet here, in the heart of an alien empire, he was discovering that sometimes the greatest mysteries lay not in the stars, but in the hearts of those we least expect. As the royal chamber doors closed behind him, Darius knew that the choices he made in the days to come would shape not only his fate, but perhaps the fate of an entire empire. Hidden agendas and silent allies. In the days that followed, Darius found himself drawn deeper into the inner workings of the Lithari Empire. The palace seemed to shift and transform, like a living organism, revealing new chambers and hidden passageways as he familiarized himself with its labyrinthine layout. Each day brought new interactions with Princess Aurora, who oscillated between the roles of captor and confidant, testing his patience and curiosity. She had a way of questioning him, peeling back layers with each conversation, and though Darius was no stranger to interrogation, he found himself playing a careful game of deflection and intrigue. One evening, as he explored a quiet garden on the palace grounds, Darius felt a presence behind him. Turning quickly, he found himself face to face with a young Lithari woman, her violet eyes glowing in the dim starlight. Her clothing marked her as a servant, yet there was a certain intensity in her gaze that suggested more than servitude. "You're Darius Kane, the bounty hunter," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to ensure they were alone. "They speak of you here." The human warrior who has captured the princess's attention. Darius narrowed his eyes. "And who are you?" The woman looked him squarely in the eye, her tone low and urgent. "My name is Lyra. I am a friend of the resistance. We've been waiting for someone like you." Darius felt his heart quicken. He had heard nothing from Azar since their first encounter, but he'd sensed something brewing in the palace. Lyra's appearance only confirmed his suspicions. "And what does the resistance expect from me?" Lyra's eyes softened, almost pleading. "We want your help. The princess believes she can control you, but we know differently. You are not a pawn, Darius. You're a wild card in a game that has grown far too dangerous." Darius's gaze sharpened. "You're asking me to spy on the princess?" Lyra hesitated, glancing around the garden as if the trees themselves might be listening. "Not spy, watch, learn. The princess, she has plans that could bring devastation to worlds far beyond this one. She seeks ancient Lithari technology, something buried in the forgotten regions of the palace. We believe she's close to finding it." "What kind of technology?" Darius asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra shook her head. "We don't know exactly. It's a relic of the first Lithari Empire, a power source or weapon that could shift the balance of the galaxy. Aurora believes it will solidify her rule and protect her people, but if it falls into the wrong hands..." She trailed off, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Darius felt the weight of her words settling over him. If Aurora's intentions were as dangerous as Lyra suggested, then his role here was far more critical than he'd realized. But he had to be certain. He had no intention of being manipulated by the resistance any more than he was by the princess. "What makes you think I'll help?" he asked, testing her. Lyra took a step closer, her voice soft yet resolute. "Because you're not like them. You're human. And humanity, you have something we Lithari lost long ago. Resilience, empathy, the ability to see beyond power." Darius stared at her, surprised by her insight. Lyra's words resonated with him, echoing the thoughts he kept buried since his arrival. There was a certain rigidity in the Lithari, a single-minded devotion to their empire that left little room for compassion or understanding. He was beginning to see it in Aurora herself, even in the rare moments when her mask slipped, revealing glimpses of loneliness or regret. Before he could respond, the faint sound of approaching footsteps sent Lyra into a frenzy. She pressed something into his hand, a small, smooth stone with strange symbols etched onto its surface. "This will guide you," she whispered. "When the time is right, you'll know what to do." With that, she slipped into the shadows, leaving Darius alone in the quiet, otherworldly garden. He looked down at the stone in his hand, feeling the intricate carvings with his thumb. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, as if alive. He tucked it into his pocket, glancing around once more before making his way back inside. The next day, Darius was summoned to the palace's grand observatory, a towering structure with transparent walls offering a panoramic view of the Lithari sky. Stars glittered in the vastness, casting their light over a landscape both beautiful and strange. Princess Aurora stood at the center of the room, gazing out over her empire with an expression that was both prideful and pensive. "Darius," she greeted him without turning around. "What do you think of the Lithari?" Darius approached her cautiously. "I think they're disciplined, driven." Aurora's lips curved into a small smile. "You choose your words carefully. That is wise." She turned to face him, her gaze piercing. "The Lithari have always been a people of purpose. We were born to lead, to shake the galaxy. But the universe does not always reward strength. Sometimes it tests it." Darius nodded, choosing his next words with care. "And how does one pass such a test?" Aurora looked away, her voice tinged with a hint of melancholy. "By evolving. adapting, but that is not always easy for my people. The Lithari have long held to tradition, to duty. It is difficult for us to embrace change, to open ourselves to new ways of thinking. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. That is why you fascinate me, Darius. You are human, yet you defy categorization. You are strong, yet adaptable. Fierce, yet thoughtful. I brought you here to learn from you, to understand what makes humanity so unpredictable. Darius met her gaze, a flicker of empathy stirring within him. Despite her regal demeanor, he could see the weight she carried, the loneliness that shadowed her every move. Curiosity isn't weakness, Your Highness, it's strength. Aurora's expression softened, her usual steely composure giving way to a moment of vulnerability. Perhaps. But in the Lithari court, curiosity is often viewed as a liability. My father was a great ruler, yet his death left a void that I have struggled to fill. Every day, I am reminded that my people expect nothing less than perfection. Darius saw an opportunity, a chance to learn more about the technology Lyra had mentioned. Sometimes it's not about perfection, but about understanding the past, he said, watching her closely. About finding what has been lost. Aurora's gaze sharpened. And what do you think has been lost, Darius? He hesitated, his mind racing. Perhaps knowledge. Ancient knowledge, buried beneath layers of history. For a moment, her eyes flashed with something unreadable. You're perceptive, Darius. Yes, there is something, an artifact hidden within the palace. It is said to hold the wisdom of the first Lithari rulers, knowledge that could change the fate of the empire. Darius forced himself to remain calm, his heart pounding. And you seek this knowledge to protect your people. Aurora nodded, her voice filled with conviction. To protect them, yes. But also to prove that I am worthy of the crown I wear. This empire needs strength, but it also needs a vision, one that extends beyond our borders. Darius knew he was walking a dangerous line, but he pressed on. Then maybe, in seeking that knowledge, you will find what you're truly looking for. The princess held his gaze, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. Perhaps you're right, but understand this, Darius, if I find it, I will do whatever is necessary to secure my empire's future, even if it means sacrificing everything. Darius felt a shiver run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and he could see the depths of her ambition. She wasn't merely curious, she was prepared to wield this ancient power, whatever the cost. As the evening drew to a close, Darius returned to his quarters, his mind racing with possibilities. He had glimpsed a side of Aurora few had ever seen, yet it only deepened the mystery. She was a ruler who wanted both strength and wisdom, a warrior and a scholar bound by duty, but yearning for something more. Sitting alone in his quarters, Darius withdrew the small stone Lyra had given him, examining the strange markings. It pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. The resistance was right. There was something ancient here, something powerful that could tip the balance of the galaxy. And if Aurora succeeded in harnessing it, there was no telling what she might do. As he stared into the stone's pulsing light, Darius realized he was no longer just a hunter or a captive. He was caught between two opposing forces, with a choice that could reshape the very course of the empire. The princess saw him as a means to an end, but he knew that his own purpose was still evolving. For the first time, he felt the gravity of his situation pressing down on him like a weight he could not escape. He was a man alone, caught in the crossfire of an empire's ambitions and a resistance's desperation. And as he prepared for the days ahead, Darius knew that whatever path he chose, it would forever alter his destiny, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. The web of deception. As dawn broke over the shimmering spires of the Lithari Palace, Darius awoke to the soft hum of machinery resonating through his quarters. He rose slowly, the events of the previous night still vivid in his mind. Every encounter with Princess Aurora left him questioning his next move, but now, Armed with knowledge of her intentions and the Resistance's plea, he understood the precarious game he was playing. The princess was not just a ruler, she was a seeker of ancient power, prepared to risk everything to secure her empire's future. But to what end? And he wondered, could he really trust the Resistance's motives any more than hers? Before he could dwell on it further, a soft chime announced a visitor. The doors slid open, and Val entered, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. "Darius," she said, inclining her head slightly, "the princess has requested your presence in the Hall of Archives." Darius raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The Hall of Archives?" Vala nodded. "It is where we house the knowledge and artifacts of our ancestors, many of which date back to the First Lithari Empire. Few are permitted access." He sensed the significance of the invitation. This was a rare gesture of trust, one he could not ignore. If Aurora was allowing him into the archives, she might be testing him, or perhaps offering a glimpse into her world, one that might explain the Lithari's guarded legacy. As Vava led him through the palace, Darius felt the energy in the air shift. They passed through several security checkpoints, guarded by silent, imposing Lithari soldiers whose gaze followed him intently. The deeper they went, the darker and colder the corridors became, as though they were descending into the very heart of the Empire's secrets. Finally, they arrived at a set of massive doors, etched with ancient symbols that glowed faintly under Vala's touch. The doors opened slowly, revealing a vast chamber filled with towering shells, holographic displays, and artifacts encased in shimmering glass. The air was thick with a reverent silence, as if every object held 1,000 stories, waiting to be uncovered. Princess Aurora stood at the center of the room, her posture regal and commanding. She turned as they approached, her gaze locking onto Darius with an intensity that made him acutely aware of the weight of his presence here. "Welcome, Darius," she said, gesturing for him to come closer. "This is the Hall of Archives. Here, we preserve the legacy of our people, the remnants of those who came before us. Knowledge, power, artifacts, all that the Lithari holds sacred." Darius took in the scene, feeling both awe and suspicion. "It's impressive, Your Highness." Aurora's lips curved into a small smile. "More than impressive, Darius. This room contains secrets that could change the fate of worlds. The Lithari have always understood that knowledge is power." She led him through the rows of relics, her fingers lightly tracing over the glass cases. They stopped in front of a pedestal where a small, intricately carved stone rested, not unlike the one Lyra had given him. Darius's pulse quickened as he recognized the symbols etched on its surface, identical to those on his own stone. "This is an artifact from the earliest days of the Lithari," Aurora explained, her voice soft yet firm. "It is said to be part of a series of devices created by our ancestors, each containing fragments of a power source they called Lumora. Legend has it that Lumora could harness the energy of the stars themselves." Darius's mind raced. If the stories were true, Lumora was no mere relic. It was a potential weapon, an ancient power beyond comprehension. He glanced at Aurora, noting the way her gaze lingered on the artifact with a blend of reverence and longing. "Why show this to me?" he asked, his tone careful. Aurora's gaze remained fixed on the stone. "Because I sense you are not as indifferent to our ways as you pretend to be, Darius. You are curious, driven, and perhaps you can help me unlock Lumora's potential." He felt a chill run down his spine. "You're asking for my help." "Not asking," she corrected, her gaze sharpening. "Offering an alliance. You have a strength, a resilience that the Lithari lack. If you aid me in locating the other pieces of Lumora, I can ensure your freedom and offer you something even more valuable, a place of honor within the Empire." Darius looked away, wrestling with the implications of her offer. The allure of freedom was strong, but he couldn't ignore the growing unease in his chest. He had come to understand the intensity of Aurora's ambition, but aligning himself with her might mean risking far more than he could afford. "I'll consider it," he replied, masking his apprehension. Aurora's expression softened just slightly. "Good. I knew you were a man of vision. She dismissed him, instructing Vala to escort him back. As they left the archives, Darius's mind was consumed with conflicting thoughts. If Aurora succeeded in her quest for Lumora, she could become an unstoppable force. But the Resistance's motives were no less murky. He was caught between two opposing forces, each with its own agenda, and he was beginning to wonder if he could trust either. Later that night, Darius sat alone in his quarters, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He retrieved the stone Lyra had given him, studying its symbols in the dim light. He traced the markings with his finger, feeling the subtle warmth it emitted. The Resistance had warned him about Aurora's intentions, but now he realized the scope of her ambition was even greater than they'd implied. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He stood, expecting Vala or another palace guard, but when he opened the door, Lyra slipped in, her eyes sharp and filled with urgency. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she whispered, glancing around the room as if to ensure they were alone. Darius nodded, his voice low. "Lumora, she wants my help finding the other pieces." Lyra's expression darkened. "Then she's closer than we feared. Darius, you must understand. If she gathers all pieces of Lumora, she will be unstoppable. The Lithari Empire will expand, consuming entire star systems." Darius felt a surge of frustration. "Why should I believe you any more than her? You ask for my trust, but offer me little more than warnings and shadows." Lyra's gaze softened, a hint of desperation in her eyes. "Because the Resistance is not fighting for power, Darius. We're fighting to preserve what's left of the galaxy's freedom. The Lithari once ruled with compassion, with wisdom. But over time, ambition and pride have corrupted our leaders, turning our empire into a force of conquest." He studied her, sensing the sincerity in her words. But trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was a man caught between two forces, each wielding promises and secrets. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Gather information," Lyra replied. "Aurora won't reveal everything to you at once, but if you gain her trust, you can discover the location of the other pieces. The Resistance can guide you from there." Darius's mind churned with the weight of her request. He was no stranger to manipulation, but this was different. The fate of worlds, entire star systems, hung in the balance. After a moment he nodded. "I'll help, but on my terms." Lyra looked at him, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Darius. You don't know how much this means to us." As she slipped back into the shadows, Darius leaned against the wall, feeling the enormity of his choices pressing down on him. He was no longer a mere bounty hunter. He was a pawn, or perhaps a king, on a board filled with powers far beyond his own. The next day, Aurora summoned him to her private chambers, a rare invitation that heightened his caution. Her quarters were as magnificent as the rest of the palace, but here he sensed a more personal touch, objects that spoke of a life beyond duty. Paintings of distant worlds, sculptures of creatures he couldn't identify, relics of a life dedicated to both beauty and power. "Thank you for coming, Darius," she said, her tone softer than usual. "I wanted to speak with you privately, away from the expectations of court." He inclined his head, curious yet wary. "What do you need, Your Highness?" She gestured to a seat beside her, and he sat, studying her with a guarded expression. She seemed different today, less the commanding ruler, and more the woman who had shared glimpses of vulnerability. "Darius," she began, her voice almost hesitant, "have you ever questioned your purpose, your path?" He was taken aback by the question, sensing the weight behind it. "Many times, but I've learned to trust my instincts, to adapt as I go." Aurora nodded, as if his answer had touched a nerve. "I envy that resilience. My path was chosen for me the day I was born. I have fought to uphold my father's legacy, to protect my people, but there are moments when I wonder if the cost is too great." He watched her, sensing the internal struggle beneath her composed exterior. "Then why pursue Lumora?" he asked quietly. "You could lead your people without it, without risking everything. She looked away, her voice a near whisper. Because I fear that without it, my people will fall. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Darius. The Lithari are strong, but we are not invincible. Lumora could ensure our survival, secure our legacy. Darius's heart clenched with a mixture of empathy and dread. He could see the sincerity in her, but also the desperation, the kind that could blind even the strongest to the consequences of their actions. "You're not alone, Aurora," he said, breaking the formal tone. "But you're walking a fine line. Power can protect, but it can also destroy." She met his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "And what would you do, Darius? If you had the power to save your people, would you not seize it?" He hesitated, his mind torn between duty and compassion. "I'd try to balance strength with wisdom, to see beyond conquest." Aurora's expression softened, as though his words had struck a chord. For a brief moment, he saw the woman behind the title, someone bound by duty, but haunted by doubts. "Perhaps that's why I need you," she murmured, almost to herself. Darius rose, inclining his head in silent respect. As he left her chambers, he knew that his path was set. He would play both sides, gathering information and guarding his own motives. For in the heart of the Lithari Empire, he was neither hero nor villain, but a catalyst for a conflict that would shape the galaxy's future, and perhaps his own. Whispers of rebellion. Darius found himself standing on a precipice. In the days that followed his private conversation with Princess Aurora, he felt the weight of his role intensify. He was no longer a simple captive, nor merely a pawn in the princess's game. He had become a central figure in the Lithari Empire's most dangerous pursuit, with stakes that stretched far beyond himself. The promise of Lumora, the ancient power source that could bend the galaxy to its will, loomed over every encounter, every word exchanged. But with this awareness came the knowledge that he was not alone. The resistance was growing restless, and allies, seen and unseen, began to reveal themselves in unexpected places. One evening, as the palace settled into the quiet hush of twilight, Darius received a cryptic message. A slip of iridescent paper had been left under his door, the words glowing faintly in the darkness. The message was simple. "The window opens in the garden's eastern pavilion. Midnight. Trust no one." Darius read it over, committing the words to memory before crumpling the paper and casting it into the small, flickering incinerator beside his desk. He had been under watch since his arrival. Such messages were both a gift and a risk. Still, the chance to understand his place in the Resistance's plans could not be ignored. He was done waiting for answers. When the palace fell silent and the stars had taken their place in the sky, Darius made his way to the eastern pavilion. The gardens were beautiful at night, alive with plants that glowed faintly, casting the paths in soft hues of blue and green. It was an alien paradise, but one that reminded him of the seductive danger he faced. The palace guards patrolled methodically, their footfalls muffled by the thick vegetation. Darius moved with practiced stealth, his every step calculated to avoid detection. As he approached the pavilion, a figure materialized from the shadows, blending seamlessly with the twisted, shimmering vines that surrounded them. It was Azar, the same rebel who had first reached out to him. His expression was tense, his movements sharp and wary, as if he too sensed the razor's edge they both walked. "Azar," Darius greeted quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What's this all about?" Azar's eyes narrowed, casting a quick look around before he spoke. "The Resistance is moving forward. We don't have time to wait for Aurora's plans to unfold. She's getting closer to Lumora, and as she unlocks its power, there will be no stopping her." Darius crossed his arms, his voice a low murmur. "And you think I can prevent that?" Azar's gaze was unwavering. "Yes, you're already close to her, and she trusts you, more than she should. We need you to find out where she plans to search next. There are pieces of Lumora scattered across the Empire, hidden in places only the royal family has access to." Darius's mind raced, recalling the artifacts he'd seen in the Hall of Archives. She mentioned something about other pieces, but she didn't give any specifics. Azar nodded. She won't. But if you can gain access to her private records, you'll find the information we need. There's an ancient map, one that shows the locations of the Lumora fragments. With it, we can reach them before she does. Darius's jaw tightened. He was no stranger to high-stakes espionage, but infiltrating Aurara's personal files would require more than skill. It would demand absolute discretion and a willingness to risk everything. And what's your plan if we get our hands on Lumora? The Resistance has its own ambitions, doesn't it? Azar's gaze hardened, his voice a fierce whisper. The Resistance isn't after power for the sake of conquest, Darius. We want to restore balance, to prevent the Empire from becoming a weapon. The Lithari once thrived on wisdom and unity, not domination. Lumora could either be our salvation or our downfall. The weight of the task settled over Darius like a storm. He was caught between the ambitions of a princess who saw him as an ally and a resistance that viewed him as their only hope. Both sides believed they could use him, but he knew that his decisions would shape more than just the future of the Empire. They would determine the fate of countless worlds. "I'll do it," Darius finally said, his voice low but firm. "But if I do this, I need assurances. No more cryptic messages or half-baked plans. If I get you that map, I expect you to honor your end of the deal." Azar's expression softened, and he extended a hand. "Agreed. Get us the map, and we'll help you get out of this palace, out of the Empire, if that's what you choose." Darius clasped Azar's hand, sealing their uneasy alliance. But he knew that even with this pact, he couldn't afford to trust anyone fully. Not Azar, not the Resistance, and certainly not Princess Aurora. The next day, Darius set his plan into motion. He knew he'd need to gain Aurora's trust further, to become indispensable to her. It meant probing, subtly pushing her boundaries, finding ways to position himself as both confidant and collaborator. Over the following days, he played his part, weaving himself deeper into her world. They walked the palace gardens together, shared meals where he carefully engaged her in discussions about her vision for the Empire, always listening, always learning. One afternoon, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the palace grounds, Darius sensed an opening. Aurora seemed more at ease than usual, her gaze softened as she looked out over her empire. "Do you ever worry about the cost, Aurora?" he asked, his tone casual. "The price of power." She glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "Of course. My father once told me that true power comes not from strength, but from understanding. Yet, I fear he underestimated the dangers we face. Our empire is strong, but strength alone won't ensure our survival." Darius nodded, feigning understanding as he carefully steered the conversation. "And Lumora, you believe it holds the answers?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting. "Lumora is more than a power source, Darius. It's a symbol, a reminder of the greatness our people once achieved. If I can restore that legacy, I'll secure the future for generations." Darius suppressed a shiver. He could see the depths of her ambition, the conviction that drove her to pursue Lumora with unwavering determination. But it was also clear that she carried doubts, hidden behind the mask of authority. "Then perhaps we should prepare," he suggested. "If Lumora is as powerful as you believe, unlocking its secrets will require more than just knowledge. We'll need a map, a guide to the places it's hidden, to avoid any unnecessary risks." She looked at him, a flicker of suspicion in her gaze. "You're quite astute, Darius. Most would assume Lumora is merely a myth." Darius shrugged. "I've seen enough of the galaxy to know that myths often hold the greatest truths." For a tense moment, he feared he had overstepped, but Aurora's expression softened. "You are right, I have a map, one passed down through generations. It shows the locations of each piece of Lumora, scattered across our territory. But only a select few have ever seen it." Darius held her gaze, masking his excitement. "Then perhaps it's time to trust another with that knowledge." Aurora paused, as if weighing her decision. Finally, she nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll show you the map. If you were to help me, you'll need to understand the full scope of our mission." As he left her chambers, Darius felt a surge of adrenaline. He was one step closer to the information the Resistance needed, but he knew he'd have to be careful. This was no longer just about survival. It was about outmaneuvering both the Princess and the Resistance, each driven by forces that could consume him if he wasn't vigilant. The following evening, Aurora led him to her private study, a hidden room within her quarters accessible only by her biometric signature. The room was filled with holographic displays and ancient scrolls, relics of a history she seemed to hold sacred. At the center of the room, a hologram flickered to life, projecting an intricate map of the galaxy, with certain planets marked in glowing symbols. "This," she began, her voice reverent, "is the legacy of the Lithari. Each symbol represents a piece of Lumora, hidden on worlds that have long since been forgotten by time. My father believed that reuniting them would bring us closer to our ancestors, to the power they once wielded." Darius nodded, studying the map. He committed every detail to memory, careful not to betray his intentions. Each symbol held a key, a location that could change the balance of power. He understood now why the Resistance feared her plans. If Aurora succeeded, the Lithari Empire would be unstoppable. As they examined the map together, Aurora's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability crossing her face. "Darius, do you believe I'm doing the right thing?" The question took him by surprise. He had expected conviction, unwavering resolve, but here, in the privacy of her study, he saw a woman burdened by the weight of her choices. He met her gaze, choosing his words carefully. "I think you believe it's the right thing, and maybe in time, you'll come to understand the full cost of that belief." Aurora nodded, her expression pensive. "Perhaps, but if Lumora brings peace to my people, then any price is worth paying." Darius remained silent, knowing that his next actions would define not only his own fate, but the fate of everyone bound to the Lithari Empire's reach. The line between loyalty and betrayal had grown thin, almost imperceptible, and he realized with chilling clarity that he was the only one who could walk it. As he left her study that night, he felt the cold weight of the Resistance stone in his pocket, a reminder of the promises he had made and the choices that lay ahead. He was a man caught between loyalties, torn between the Princess's vision and the rebellion's plea for freedom. And though the path before him was uncertain, one thing was clear: when the final piece of Lumora was found, everything would change.